Perfect. The word echoed in the sun-drenched kitchen, tasting like freedom on my tongue. I'd just said it to my daughter-in-law Isabella, moments after she'd informed me that only 20 members of her family were descending upon my home for Christmas. I was going on vacation. They could handle the cooking, the cleaning, the everything. I was not the hired help. Her face, usually a mask of cool composure, went slack with a shock so profound it was almost comical. But the pale horror dawning in her eyes was nothing compared to the surprise I had waiting in the wings. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever been taken for granted, then you understand why I had to do this. Subscribe to the channel. Stay with me. There are more stories like mine to tell. My name is Clara. I am 68 years old. And for the last 6 years, since my son, Daniel, married Isabella, I have been the ghost in my own house. A useful, silent ghost who cooked, cleaned, and served, but a ghost nonetheless. It began subtly, a slow erosion of my personhood disguised as familial closeness. Clara, you make the best roast. Would you mind? Became Clara. We're having some colleagues over. You know what to do. It morphed into just leave the mess. Mom, Isabella has an early morning, and the keys are under the mat for the cleaner, a cleaner I paid for, but never seemed to clean up after. Isabella's whirlwind existence. I had believed it was the price of admission to my son's life, that by being indispensable, I would remain essential. I was wrong. I had simply made myself a permanent fixture on the shelf, to be taken down and used when needed, then ignored until the next event. The Tuesday before Christmas, Isabella swept into my kitchen, a space that had once been my sanctuary, filled with the scent of baking bread and simmering soup. Says, if she owned it. She never knocked. She wore a cream-colored cashmere set that probably cost more than my first car. Bought, no doubt, with the money Daniel worked 80-hour weeks to earn. Her blonde hair was a perfect sheet of silk, and her heels, those sharp, stiletto heels, clicked a staccato rhythm of ownership on my wide plank oak floors. Clara, she said, her voice a blend of condescension and false sweetness, she reserved exclusively for me. I have the most wonderful news. My entire family is coming to spend Christmas here. It's only 20 people, only 20. She said it as if it were a casual drop-in, as if feeding and housing 24 souls was a minor logistical footnote. I watched the calculation in her eyes as she settled into my favorite worn-in armchair. Crossing her legs with a fluid, practiced motion, she began listing them off, a roster of names that meant nothing to me beyond being extensions of her. My sister Gabriella and her husband Stefan, my cousins Lucas and Matteo, Aunt Sophia, Uncle Lorenzo from Milan, the children. Of course, it's going to be absolutely perfect. She took a dramatic pause, her eyes scanning my face, waiting for the familiar flutter of anxiety, the frantic mental calculations she so loved to provoke. Naturally, you'll handle everything. The cooking, the seating arrangements, the decorations. I want it to look like something out of a magazine for my social media. Her words were not a request. They were a royal decree. I felt them land, each one a tiny puncture in the dam of my composure. I remembered all the dinner parties where I'd spent days preparing canapes and reducing sauces only to have her accept compliments with a regal nod. All the times I'd scrubbed wine stains from my good tablecloth while she slept off the champagne. All the times I had been made to feel like the help in the house my late husband, Michael, and I had built with our own hands. We'll need at least 2 prime ribs, she continued, oblivious to the tectonic shift happening within me. And that lemon rosemary focaccia you make. Oh, and you'll have to deck the entire house in fresh greenery and white lights. I've already sent the inspiration board to your email. She waited for my usual, compliant, of course, Isabella, but the script had been rewritten. Perfect, I said, my voice unnervingly calm. Her smile flickered, a tiny short circuit in her confidence. I knew you'd. It will be a perfect Christmas for you all, I continued, cutting her off, because I won't be here. The click of her heels stilled. The air in the kitchen grew thick and heavy. She blinked, slowly, as if trying to clear a smudge from her vision. Her mouth opened, then closed. What do you mean you won't be here? Exactly what you heard. I'm going on vacation. You all can cook, clean, and serve yourselves. I am not your employee. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of high, sharp color on her cheekbones. The delicate china cup she'd picked up rattled violently against its saucer. For the first time in 6 years, Isabella was speechless. But, Clara, she stammered, her composure cracking. I've already told everyone. It's all arranged. The flights are booked. You can't do this. Of course I can. It's my house. Those 4 words landed like a declaration of independence in the quiet kitchen. Isabella shot up from the chair, her movements jerky. This is absurd. Daniel will never allow this. Daniel can have whatever opinion he likes. The decision is made. I felt a strange, serene power coursing through me. For the first time, I was holding the reins. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my departure wasn't a spur-of-a-moment rebellion. It was a meticulously planned extraction. And I had my reasons. Reasons that would soon turn their perfectly curated world upside down. Isabella's shock melted into pure, undiluted fury. She took a step toward me, invading the space she knew I valued, trying to intimidate as she always did. You know, Clara, I always knew you were selfish, but this is a new low. Her voice was venom, each word a carefully aimed dart. My family is traveling from Italy, from Switzerland, and you're going to ruin their Christmas over some petty grievance. A petty grievance. 6 years of servitude, of erased boundaries, of quiet humiliation, and she called it a petty grievance. I felt the old, familiar heat of rage rise in my chest, but I kept it banked. I had learned to be an ocean.com on the surface. That's not my problem, I replied, my calmness seeming to infuriate her further. You should have consulted me before inviting a small army to my house. Our house, she shrieked, the mask shattering completely. Daniel is your son. This house will be ours one day. There it was, the unvarnished truth, finally spoken aloud. I wasn't family. I was a placeholder, a temporary custodian of an asset she was already counting. A fascinating perspective, I murmured, watching her eyes widen as she realized her slip. Very fascinating. The front door opened, the sound of keys in the lock and Daniel's tired sigh filling the hallway. Isabella flew to him like a startled bird, her heels clattering a desperate tattoo. Daniel, your mother has lost her mind. She says she's abandoning us for Christmas. She's leaving us with my entire family. I heard their hushed, urgent voices from the living room. Isabella's was a sharp, rising crescendo. Daniel's a low, weary murmur. After a moment, they appeared in the kitchen doorway. My son looked exhausted, his suit jacket slung over his shoulder, his tie loosened. Behind him, Isabella stood with her arms crossed, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. Sure, her champion would put me back in my box. Mom, Daniel began, using the patronizing tone he'd adopted since marrying into money. Izzy told me about this idea. Don't you think you're being a bit dramatic? Dramatic. My own son, the boy I'd raised to be kind, was reducing my bid for freedom to melodrama. Something cold and hard, something that had been growing for months, finally solidified in my gut. No, Daniel, I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear. But, Mom, it's Christmas. It's about family. Isabella's family is already on their way. We can't cancel. I didn't say cancel. I said I won't be here. Isabella stepped forward, physically inserting herself between us. See, she's being completely irrational. What will my family think? What am I supposed to tell them? The truth, I suggested mildly, that you assumed you had a live-in caterer and concierge and were mistaken. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. Mom, be reasonable. You know Isabella can't cook for 20 people by herself. And why not? I asked. I've done it for her for years. It's time, she learned. But I work, Isabella protested. I can't just take days off to cook. My career is important. Her career, a vaguely defined consulting job she did from her laptop, a job that seemed to involve long lunches and online shopping more than actual work. But of course, her career was paramount. My time, my energy, my retirement, they were disposable. Then hire a caterer, I said with a serene smile. I'm sure there are excellent ones in the city. Catering costs a fortune. Mom, Daniel exclaimed. Why spend thousands of dollars when you can? He stopped, his mouth snapping shut. When I can do it for free. I finished for him, like I always have, like the unpaid staff you both think I am. The silence that followed was a chasm opening up between us. They exchanged a glance, a silent communication of shared panic. Look, Mom, Daniel tried again, softening his voice into the manipulative cadence he used when he wanted something. I know you've been a little sensitive lately. Maybe it's the stress of the holidays. We can get you some help, someone to talk to. He was pathologizing my sanity, reducing my justified rebellion to a symptom of fragile mental health. The fury I'd kept contained began to simmer, but my voice remained steady. There is nothing sensitive about this, Daniel. This is about one very simple thing: respect. And for 6 years, neither you nor your wife has shown me any. That's not true, Isabella cried. We've always included you, your family, the part of the family that serves, I clarified, the part that is never consulted but is always expected to obey. Daniel moved closer, placing a hand on my shoulder, a touch that once brought me comfort but now felt like a chain. Okay, Mom, I hear you. You're upset, but just get through this 1 week. After New Year's, everything can go back to normal. Normal, their normal, where I was the silent, smiling appliance in the background, where my home was their weekend resort, where my feelings were an inconvenient complication to their comfortable life. No, Daniel, things are not going back to normal. I'm leaving tomorrow. They both froze. Isabella was the first to break, her voice screeching up an octave. Tomorrow, I already have everything arranged. What they didn't know was how true that was. My arrangements were just not what they imagined. This is insane, Isabella shrieked, pacing the length of my kitchen like a caged tigress. You can't leave tomorrow. It's impossible. My family arrives in 2 days. Then you should have considered that before you took my labor for granted, I replied, turning to calmly rinse my coffee cup in the sink. Every movement was deliberate, a performance of my unshakable resolve. Daniel just stood there, shifting his weight, a man caught in a crossfire he'd helped create. Mom, please, he pleaded, at least tell us where you're going, when you'll be back. I'm going to visit my old college friend, Beatrice, in Palm Springs, I lied smoothly. I'll be back after the new year. The lie came easily. It was necessary. They couldn't know the truth. Not yet, after New Year's, Isabella practically choked. But what are we going to do? My Aunt Sophia has already flown in from Milan. Gabriella took time off her surgical rotation. Those are non-refundable, first-class tickets. Those are your problems, not mine. I saw the desperation eclipse, the rage on her face. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the marble countertop, her knuckles bleached white. Clara, she said, her voice suddenly switching to a syrupy, manipulative purr. You know, I've always looked up to you. You're like a second mother to me. You're so important to us. You can't just abandon us like this. The tactical shift from fury to emotional blackmail. I knew this playbook by heart. It no longer worked on me. If you truly saw me as a mother, you wouldn't treat me like domestic staff. But I don't, she insisted, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I thought you enjoyed it. I thought you liked to feel useful. Useful. The word was a shard of ice in my heart. For 6 years, I had clung to that notion that my usefulness was my value. Now I saw it for the trap it was. You're right, Isabella. I do like to feel useful. That's why I'm going to be useful to myself, for the first time in years. Daniel interjected, his frustration boiling over. Mom, this isn't fair. You know we don't have the money for a caterer for 20 people. The down payment on the new penthouse wiped us out. A new penthouse. This was the first I was hearing of it. My gaze sharpened. What new penthouse? Isabella and Daniel exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated guilt. Well, Daniel began, studying his shoes. We were going to tell you after the holidays. We found an incredible place downtown. Top floor, panoramic views, a concierge. It sounds expensive, I observed, my mind racing. Well, yes, but it's an investment. And don't worry, we're not moving far. Only 20 minutes away. 20 minutes, close enough to continue using my home as their private event space, far enough to claim their privacy. How convenient. And how do you plan to pay for it? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Isabella's face lit up with sudden, desperate inspiration. That's why this Christmas is so important. My Uncle Lorenzo is a venture capitalist. He's been incredibly impressed with how we manage everything here. He's thinking of investing in Daniel's firm, and my brother-in-law Stefan has connections with the building's developers. If everything is perfect, it could seal the deal. There it was, the naked truth. This wasn't about family or tradition. It was a performance, a carefully staged play to extract money from her wealthy relatives. And I was the unseen stagehand, expected to make the magic happen. I see, I murmured, letting the silence stretch. So you need a perfect Christmas to impress the money. Exactly, Isabella exclaimed, relieved I was finally grasping the stakes. I knew you'd understand. You're so smart, Clara. You always know the right thing to do. The right thing. For 6 years, the right thing had been my perpetual self-sacrifice. Now, I had a new definition. You're right, Isabella. I do know the right thing to do. That's why my decision stands. I'm leaving tomorrow. The hope drained from their faces. Isabella's breath started coming in short, sharp gasps. You can't ruin our future over a tantrum. It's not a tantrum, it's a boundary. But what will my family think when they arrive and there's no one to host them? No food. They'll think their niece is an irresponsible adult who invited them to a party she wasn't prepared to host. And they'll be correct. Daniel stepped closer, his desperation a physical force in the room. Mom, please, if you need a vacation, we'll pay for it. Anywhere you want, after the holidays. A cruise, a resort, anything. They'd pay for it. With what money? The money they apparently didn't have for a caterer. The offer was 6 years too late. The offer is generous, Daniel, but my decision is final. This is emotional blackmail. Isabella burst out, her mask of civility gone. You're holding us hostage. The phrase hung in the air, rich with irony. You know what emotional blackmail is, Isabella? I asked, my voice low and clear. It's making me feel guilty for wanting a weekend to myself. It's telling me that a real grandmother would be happy to babysit at a moment's notice, even when I have plans. It's assuming my life has no value beyond serving yours. What you've done for 6 years is far worse than blackmail. It's erasure. Every word was a stone dropped into still water, and I watched the ripples of truth hit them. They both flinched. The kitchen fell into a heavy silence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the ragged sound of Isabella's breathing, but louder than all of it was the sound of my own impending liberation. Because tomorrow, everything would change, and they had no idea of the depth of that change. That night, while they argued in frantic whispers in the living room, I retreated to my bedroom and locked the door. It was time to activate the second phase of my plan, a plan born not of spontaneous anger, but of a chilling discovery I'd made for months before the Tuesday confrontation. I had been at their apartment, the one they were supposedly moving from watering plants while they were away for a weekend, in Daniel's home office. Looking for a pen, I'd pulled open a drawer and found a folder misplaced among his architectural blueprints. It was stuffed with bank statements, printed emails, and loan applications. At first glance, I thought they were for his firm, but then I saw my name, again and again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I waited until I was sure they were still away, then returned to their apartment under the pretense of checking the plants again. With a trembling heart, I photocopied every page. What I found was a web of deceit that stole the breath from my lungs. Isabella had opened multiple credit cards in Daniel's name, cards he knew nothing about. The balances totaled over $58,000. But it was the emails that were the true poison. Threads with her sisters discussing how to manage Daniel, how to keep him focused on work so he wouldn't notice the spending, and the most devastating one, a message to her cousin, Lucas, outlining a plan to convince Daniel that selling my house, the house his father built, was the smart financial move to consolidate their debt and fund their new lavish lifestyle. My house, the home filled with memories of Michael, of watching Daniel grow up, of a life built with love and sweat. She saw it as a piggy bank to be smashed open. The devastation was a physical pain, but from its ashes rose a cold, steely determination. The next day, I hired a discreet financial investigator recommended by my attorney. What he uncovered was even more grotesque. Isabella had been lying about her income, inflating it to Daniel to justify her spending. She had also been quietly borrowing money from her own relatives, telling them I was financially supporting them and that a large inheritance was imminent. Using this fictitious future wealth as collateral, she had built her house of cards on the foundation of my eventual death. Armed with this knowledge, I had moved quietly and decisively. I met with my lawyer. I moved my savings and the proceeds from Michael's life insurance into a new, secure account. I placed the deed to my house in an irrevocable trust, making it impossible to sell without my explicit, living consent. But my masterstroke was more subtle. I reached out to the key players in Isabella's family, not with accusations, but with concerned inquiries. I emailed her uncle Lorenzo, the venture capitalist, and her brother-in-law Stefan, the real estate connection. I wrote as a worried mother, expressing confusion over some financial documents I'd stumbled upon and asking for their guidance. I may have accidentally attached a few of the most damning credit card statements. The responses were swift and furious. Lorenzo felt deceived and used. Stefan was livid that his professional connections were being exploited based on a lie. They had confided in each other and decided to arrive a day early, on the morning of the 23rd, to confront Isabella before the Christmas festivities began. A confrontation I would be conveniently absent for. As I looked at my laptop screen in the quiet of my room, a genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in months. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect. The morning of my departure, I woke at dawn, the alarm, a sweet herald of my freedom. I dressed in comfortable, elegant clothes I'd bought for myself, packed my bags with a sense of ritual, and carried them downstairs while the house was still steeped in the silence of their shock-filled sleep. On the kitchen table, I left a simple note next to the spare key. Have left for my trip early. The house is yours. Enjoy your perfect Christmas. Clara. What the note didn't mention were my final touches. The day before, I'd methodically emptied the pantry and the refrigerator of all non-perishables and fresh food, donating everything to the local shelter. I had locked my sterling silver, my linen tablecloths, and my heirloom Christmas ornaments in the basement storage, to which I alone had the key. I had also cancelled the bi-weekly gardening and cleaning services I paid for, but which Isabella claimed credit for, boasting about her flawlessly maintained home. Let her learn what maintenance truly cost. The taxi arrived at 7 a.m. As the driver loaded my bags, I took one last look at the house, a structure of wood and stone that had been my soul's anchor, then its prison, and was now about to become my fortress once more. The resort was only 40 minutes away, a serene oasis of adobe buildings and flowering courtyards. My casita had a private patio overlooking the desert, a kiva fireplace, and, most importantly, a profound, blessed silence. No demands, no expectations, just peace. My phone began to ring at 10:30 a.m. Daniel Mo, where are you? Your note. Why did you leave so early? His voice was thick with sleep and confusion. Good morning, Daniel. I saw no reason to delay. You and Isabella have a great deal to prepare. But Mom, this is so sudden. Isabella is, well, she's not doing well. I could only imagine, the Queen without her stage manager. I'm sure she'll rise to the occasion. She's a very resourceful woman. A long pause. I could hear panicked whispering in the background. Can you at least tell us where you are? In case of an emergency, I am safe and comfortable. That is all you need to know. Mom, please. His voice cracked. I know you're angry, but this is Extremer family arrives tomorrow. We don't know what to do. Daniel, you are 34 years old. Isabella is 30. You are both adults. I have every confidence you can solve this without your 68-year-old mother. Another, longer silence. Fine. He finally sighed, defeated. But promise you're okay. And when are you coming back? I'll be back when I'm ready. Enjoy your Christmas. I hung up and set my phone to silent. I ordered a breakfast of huevos rancheros and fresh coffee, eating it slowly on my patio, savoring the warmth of the sun on my skin and the absence of demands. The phone blinked incessantly with silenced notifications. The real show was about to begin. The following morning, December 23rd, I awoke to a symphony of missed calls and voicemails. The first, from Daniel, at 6:15 a.m. Mom, pick up, please. They're arriving in an hour and a half. We have no food. The stores aren't open. We're desperate. The second, from Isabella, her voice a ragged sob. Clara, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry for whatever I did. Please, don't do this to me. My Uncle Lorenzo is here on his private jet. What am I supposed to serve him? Take out. I don't even know how to turn on the oven properly. Please, just tell me where you hid the good china. The third message was the one I'd been waiting for. A deep, authoritative voice. Mrs. Bennet, this is Lorenzo Moretti. We've arrived at the house early. I'd appreciate a moment of your time to discuss the matters we've been emailing about. Perfect. They had walked in on the ground zero of Isabella's incompetence. At 8:45 a.m., my phone rang again. Daniel. This time, I answered. Mom. His voice was a tremor. Can you talk? Good morning, Daniel. How are things? Mom, please. You have to help. They're all here, in the living room. Isabella is locked in the bathroom crying. I don't know what to do. Lorenzo is asking for you. He seems angry. Have you told him the truth? What truth? That my mother abandoned us right before Christmas. The truth that, for 6 years, you've treated me as an unpaid domestic servant and I finally decided to reclaim my life. A pause. I could hear the muffled sound of a man's stern voice in the background. He wants to talk to you. I'm on vacation, Daniel. I'm sure Isabella can explain everything. She's the one who orchestrated this gathering. Please, Mom, Just 5 minutes. He says he can help. Help them. Always. It was about helping them, never about the years of help I'd given that had been met with entitlement, not gratitude. Daniel, listen to me. For 6 years, I have been your solution. Today, you need to be your own. But it's my family, he shouted, his composure finally breaking. I heard Lorenzo's voice clearly in the background. Daniel, I need to speak with the lady of the house. Now. She's not here, Daniel wailed, his voice cracking. There is no misunderstanding here, Daniel, I said, my voice firm. There is only a reality you have chosen to ignore for years, and that reality is that a family built on exploitation is not a family at all. I hung up and turned my phone off completely. It was time to let the dominoes fall. I spent the day at the resort spa. As I lay on the massage table, the skilled therapist working out the knots of a lifetime of tension, I pictured the scene at my house, the frantic grocery runs, the discovery of the empty pantry, the stark, undecorated living room, and the arrival of a wealthy, furious Italian patriarch demanding answers. That evening, I checked my email. There was a message from Lorenzo. Mrs. Bennet. The situation here is untenable. Isabella cannot provide a coherent explanation for the absence of preparations or for the financial documents you shared. We have had a frank discussion. It appears my niece has been living a life of significant deception at your expense and at Daniel's. We will be staying at a hotel. I would appreciate a call at your earliest convenience, I replied, careful and concise. Lorenzo, I am sorry your visit has begun under these circumstances. I believe a direct conversation with Isabella about her financial choices and her expectations regarding my assets is long overdue. I wish you clarity. An hour later, my room phone rang. It was Lorenzo. Mrs. Bennet, thank you for making the time. I need to be blunt. Has my niece been using you as staff for these past years? Yes, for every gathering, large or small. And the financial records, the credit cards in Daniel's name, the loans from my brother, all authentic, I'm afraid. He was silent for a long moment. I could hear his disappointment humming down the line. She told us you were a woman of substantial means, soon to be passing a significant inheritance to them. She used this story to secure investments from family. The audacity of it took my breath away. She had been monetizing my death. Lorenzo, my will is clear. My assets are protected in a trust. Isabella inherits nothing. I see. His voice was like granite. Then, we have been profoundly deceived. My family does not tolerate this. The financial support she was counting on for your son's firm is withdrawn, permanently. And we will be having a family meeting tonight. An intervention. A family intervention. On Christmas, it was more than I had dared hope for. The next morning, Christmas Eve, I packed my bags. My work here was done. It was time to go home and reclaim what was mine. Before I left, I called my lawyer. Robert, it's Clara. Are the documents ready? They're ready, Clara. The trust is ironclad. The new residency agreement is drafted. Are you sure about today? There's no time like the present. Robert, meet me at the house in 1 hour. The taxi ride home felt like a victory lap. I arrived at 10 a.m. I unlocked my front door and stepped into a silence so profound it was palpable. The house was a disaster. Empty pizza boxes were stacked by the door. Suitcases were piled in the hallway. In the living room, they were all gathered. Daniel, looking hollowed out. Isabella, her face puffy and bare. Lorenzo, stern and imposing. Her sister Gabriella, a fierce-looking woman with a sharp gaze. And Stefan, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Clara. Daniel's voice was a whisper. I'm back. Isabella looked at me with a mixture of hatred and terror. Lorenzo stepped forward. Mrs. Bennet, Clara, it is a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. We owe you a profound apology. The apology is appreciated, Lorenzo, but it belongs to my son as well. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Robert, my lawyer, briefcase in hand. His presence sent a fresh wave of panic through the room. Why is there a lawyer here? Isabella whispered. Because after 6 years, I said, my voice clear and carrying, it is time for legally enforceable boundaries. Robert opened his briefcase. To summarize, he began, all business. Clara has placed the house in an irrevocable trust. It cannot be sold, mortgaged, or used as collateral without her express permission. Upon her passing, it transfers to a trust for Daniel, with the same protections. Daniel looked stunned. Isabella looked ill. Secondly, Robert continued, A residency agreement has been drafted. Isabella Moretti Bennett no longer has unrestricted access to this property. All visits must be pre-approved by Clara, with a minimum of 72 hours notice. You're banning me from the house, Isabella gasped. I'm establishing that this is my home, not your event space, I corrected her. Mom, I never knew it was this bad, Daniel said, his voice broken. You never looked, Daniel. You enjoyed the benefits of my labor too much to question the cost. Lorenzo turned to Isabella. Isabella, the money you borrowed from your father and me, using the story of this non-existent inheritance, it is to be repaid, in full, within the year. Furthermore, the identity fraud you committed against your husband must be addressed. We will not be pressing charges as a family, but this will have consequences. Daniel's face crumpled as Lorenzo spoke, the weight of his wife's betrayal sinking in. Gabriella spoke for the first time, her voice cold. You've embarrassed us all, Isabella. You've lied and manipulated everyone who loved you. You need help. I looked at the broken tableau of my family. The lies had been exposed, the manipulations laid bare. The house of cards had collapsed. For 6 years, I said, addressing everyone, I confused service with love. I thought if I made myself useful, I would be loved. But I was only being used. A family is not built on what one person can do for the others. It's built on mutual respect. That foundation was missing here. I looked at my son. Daniel, I love you, but you need to decide what kind of man you are. One who stands by while his wife abuses his mother, or one who demands integrity and respect in his family. Finally, I looked at Isabella. And you need to decide if you will ever become an honest woman, or remain a perpetual child who blames others for the messes she makes. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime noon. Now, I said, my voice softening just a little. It is Christmas Eve. Those of you who wish to stay and celebrate a holiday based on honesty, and perhaps, in time, forgiveness, are welcome. Those who cannot abide by these new rules know where the door is. For the first time in 6 years, the air in my house felt like my own. I was no longer a ghost. I was the architect, the owner, the matriarch. I had reclaimed my space, my voice, and my life. As I took my first steps toward a new chapter, I realized others might share this journey. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever had to find your own strength, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if you want to be here for the next story of courage and reclaiming one's life, subscribe to the channel. You're not alone.